Imagine this, on a sunny wedding morning in quaint St. Mary Mead, dashing groom Reginald Harrington vanishes without a trace, his tuxedo untouched, a cigarette still smouldering. As suspicions swirl among his tearful fiancée Eliza, jealous best man Geoffrey, stern father Sir Arthur, and ruthless creditor Silas Crowe. Clever Miss Marple unravels a web of secrets, hidden debts, family scandals, forged ledgers, and a staged kidnapping for extortion. In a shocking twist, Crowe emerges as the kidnapper, desperate to silence Reginald's exposure of his fraud. But truth prevails, reuniting lovers and restoring peace, proving no mystery escapes Marple's keen eye. Chapter 1. The joyful morning. The village of St. Mary Mead lay nestled in the gentle folds of the English countryside. Its thatched cottages and winding lanes bathed in the golden light of a perfect July dawn. It was the sort of morning that promised unalloyed happiness, with the air crisp and fragrant from overnight dew, and the distant hum of bees already at work among the hedgerows. All Saints' Church, with its ancient spire piercing the sky like a benevolent finger, stood at the heart of the village, its bells pealing out in joyful cascades that echoed across the green. Today they rang not for a Sunday service or a christening, but for the wedding of young Reginald Harrington to Miss Eliza Thornton, a match that had set tongues wagging with approval and a touch of envy for months. Reginald Harrington was the sort of young man who turned heads wherever he went, tall, with a mop of dark hair that always seemed artfully dishevelled, and eyes that sparkled with the mischief of one who lived life at full throttle. At 28, he had already earned a reputation for his love of speed racing, his sleek motor car along the narrow country roads, and for his ventures into the stock market, where his boldness often outstripped his prudence. Yet, beneath the carefree exterior lay a charm that endeared him to all, especially to Eliza Thornton, whom he had met at the annual summer fete the year before. She, the only daughter of Colonel Thornton, a retired military man now content with his pipe, and his memoirs possessed a serene beauty, soft auburn curls framing a face of delicate features, and a demeanour of quiet poise that balanced Reginald's exuberance like a steady anchor in a lively sea. Meadowbrook House, the Harrington family seat, perched on a rise overlooking the village, its red brick facade softened by climbing roses and wisteria. This morning it thrummed with an energy that bordered on frenzy. Servants hurried to and fro, their footsteps muffled on the polished oak floors. In the great hall, vases overflowed with blooms freshly cut from the garden lilies and delphiniums in shades of white and blue, arranged by the housemaids under the watchful eye of the housekeeper, Mrs. Ellis. "Mind the stems, girl," she chided. "One young parlour maid. We can't have drips on the carpet today of all days." Upstairs, in the library that doubled as a command post for the occasion, Sir Arthur Harrington paced before the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back. A widower these past 10 years, he cut an imposing figure, broad-shouldered, with a moustache that bristled like an overgrown privet hedge, and a voice accustomed to issuing commands from his days as a magistrate. "Where is that boy?" he boomed, to no one in particular, glancing at the ormolu clock on the mantel. "The carriage will be here any moment, and he's not even dressed." His tone carried the gruff affection of a father who masked worry with bluster, though those who knew him well detected a deeper undercurrent, lingering disapproval of his son's impulsive ways. In the adjoining drawing-room, a more relaxed scene unfolded. Geoffrey Blaine, Reginald's best man and closest friend from there, school days at Eton, reclined on a chintz sofa, a glass of brandy swirling idly in his hand. He was a lanky fellow, with sandy hair and a perpetual half-smile that suggested he found the world mildly amusing. Surrounded by a cluster of ushers, cousins, and old university pals, he regaled them with tales of Reginald's exploits. "Remember that time Reggie wagered he could drive from here to London in under 2 hours. Nearly wrapped the car around a tree, but dashed if he didn't make it with minutes to spare." The group chuckled, but Geoffrey's eyes held a fleeting shadow. A momentary flicker that might have been envy or something sharper, quickly banished by another sip of his drink. "Ah, well," he added with a wink, "Reggie always did like to make an entrance. Wouldn't surprise me if he's planning a dramatic arrival at the altar." As the clock in the hall chimed 11, the carriage drew up outside, its horses stamping impatiently on the gravel drive. The bridesmaids, in their fluttering gowns of pale silk, gathered in the vestibule, exchanging excited whispers. Eliza had departed earlier for the church, escorted by her father, her veil trailing like a cloud. Now, all that remained was for the groom to take his place. Sir Arthur dispatched a footman to Reginald's room, only for the man to return moments later, his face ashen. "Sir, Master Reginald isn't there. His bed's not been slept in properly, and his tuxedo's laid out on the chair, untouched." A hush fell over the house. Sir Arthur strode upstairs, Geoffrey close behind, the ushers trailing in confusion. Reginald's chamber was indeed empty, the morning light streaming through the open window onto a scene of eerie stillness. The tuxedo hung pristine on its hanger, the shirt starched and ready, shoes polished to a gleam beside the bed. On the nightstand, a silver ashtray held a half-smoked cigarette, its ash long cold, as if abandoned mid-thought. The air carried a faint trace of tobacco and cologne, but no sign of struggle, no overturned furniture, no scattered papers. "Reginald!" Sir Arthur bellowed, his voice echoing down the corridor. The household sprang into action. Servants scoured the attics and cellars. The stable lads checked the outbuildings, and the garage where Reginald's beloved motor car sat idle. Geoffrey led a party into the grounds, calling out across the lawns, and into the orchard, where apple trees heavy with fruit rustled in the breeze. The woods beyond, a favourite haunt for Reginald's solitary walks, yielded nothing but birdsong and the crackle of leaves underfoot by midday. The joyful morning had curdled into bewilderment. Word raced to the church, where Eliza waited in the vestry, her composure cracking like fine china. The villagers, clustered at the gates, murmured in speculation. What could have befallen the groom on such a day? In St. Mary Mead, where secrets simmered beneath the surface of polite society, the disappearance of Reginald Harrington was no mere mishap hinted at darker currents, unseen but ever present in the tapestry of human affairs. Chapter 2. The shadow of doubt, the disappearance of Reginald Harrington, cast an immediate pall over the idyllic village of St. Mary Mead, transforming what had been a day of eager anticipation into one shrouded in uncertainty and whispered conjecture. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, its warmth seemed mocking, illuminating the empty churchyard where only hours before a throng of well-wishers had gathered in their Sunday best. The floral arches, painstakingly woven with ribbons and blooms by the ladies of the parish flower committee, now drooped forlornly under the vicar's careful dismantling. Reverend Clements, a gentle man of middle years, with a balding pate and wire-rimmed spectacles that perpetually slipped down his nose, worked methodically, his cassock sleeves rolled up against the heat. "A sad business, this," he remarked to the verger, Mr. Hobbs, who assisted by gathering the wilted stems into a basket. "Young Harrington struck me as a lively soul, full of vigour." One prays it's nothing more than a momentary lapse, a case of nerves. Perhaps that will resolve itself before the day is out. Mr. Hobbs, a taciturn fellow with a face weathered by decades of outdoor labors, grunted in response. Nerves or no, Reverend, folks are saying otherwise. I heard tell from the baker's boy that there was shouting at Meadowbrook last night. Could be family troubles. The vicar paused, his hands lingering on a cluster of roses, their scent still sweet despite the wilting petals. He had officiated at many weddings in his time, but never one aborted so abruptly, and the thought unsettled him. The church itself, with its cool stone interior and rows of polished pews, stood silent now, the organist's sheet music abandoned. On the bench, a hymn half prepared for the recessional that would never come. Inside the vestry, a small room at the rear of the nave, furnished with a scarred oak table and a few straight-backed chairs. Eliza Thornton sat in a state of suspended animation, her wedding gown, a confection of ivory silken lace that had been the envy of every young woman in the village, now hung limp about her frame, the train pooling on the flagstone floor like a defeated banner. She had removed her veil, folding it neatly on the table, but her auburn curls remained pinned in an elaborate coiffure, a few strands escaping to frame her pale face. Her eyes, large and hazel, stared unseeing at the opposite wall, where a faded tapestry depicted the parable of the prodigal sooner, irony not lost on those who attended her. The bridesmaids, 3 in number, all cousins or close friends from Eliza's school days, hovered uncertainly, their own gowns of soft peach chiffon whispering as they moved. "Do try a sip of tea, Eliza dear," urged Miss Lydia Forbes, the eldest of the trio, a plump girl with a kind heart and a tendency to mother others. She held out a chipped china cup, steam rising faintly from its contents. Mrs. Clemens brought it fresh from the rectory. "It might steady you." Eliza accepted the cup mechanically, her fingers cold despite the summer warmth filtering through the narrow window. She took a small sip, then set it down with a clatter. "He wouldn't leave me like this," she murmured, her voice a fragile thread in the quiet room. Reginald, ... He was so excited last night, talking of our life together, the house we'd buy in, the country. It must be an accident. Perhaps he fell during one of his walks, twisted an ankle in the woods." Her words trailed off, and she twisted the sapphire engagement ring on her finger. A family heirloom from the Harrington side, its blue stone catching the light like a trapped tear. The other bridesmaids exchanged glances. Miss Amelia Grant, a sharp-featured blonde with a reputation for plain speaking, leaned forward. "Or perhaps it's that Blaine fellow Geoffrey. I never trusted him entirely. Always too smooth, too ready with a jest. And didn't he once fancy you himself, Eliza, before Reginald came along?" Eliza's head snapped up, a flush colouring her cheeks. "That's nonsense, Amelia. Geoffrey is Reginald's dearest friend. He'd no more harm him than ... than I would." Yet her denial lacked conviction, and the room fell into an awkward silence, broken only by the distant toll of the church bell marking the hour. It was at this moment that the door burst open, admitting Colonel Thornton, Eliza's father, a man of imposing stature, even in his 60s, with a ramrod straight back honed from years in the Indian Army. He strode in like a general surveying a battlefield. His face, ruddy from haste and emotion, was framed by mutton-chop whiskers gone silver, and his eyes sharp as bayonets swept the room. "Eliza, my girl, what in blazes is going on?" He enveloped her in a bear-like hug, his tweed jacket smelling of pipe tobacco and the outdoors. Pulling back, he fixed her with a steady gaze. "Tell me everything." That footman from Meadowbrook came panting to the cottage with some tale of Reginald vanishing into thin air. Preposterous. The boy's got more sense than that Tor, at least. I thought he did. Eliza recounted the morning's events in halting tones. The awaited carriage, the empty room, the futile search. The Colonel listened, his expression darkening. "Sounds like foul play to me. Or cowardice, though I'd not have pegged Harrington for a bolter. Still, debts can drive a man to desperate acts." He paced the vestry, his boots echoing on the stone. "I've half a mind to march up to Meadowbrook myself and shake the truth out of Sir Arthur. That old goat's been too indulgent with the boy, letting him run wild with those investments and motor cars." The bridesmaids murmured assent, but Eliza shook her head. "Father, please. Sir Arthur is as distraught as we are, and Reginald... He loves me, I know it." The Colonel harumphed, but his tone softened. "Very well, we'll wait for the police. But mark my words, if there's mischief afoot, I'll root it out." He dispatched Miss Forbes to fetch a carriage, determined to escort Eliza home discreetly, away from prying eyes. As they prepared to leave, a shadow of doubt lingered in the vestry air. Unspoken but palpable, was Reginald's absence a tragedy, a betrayal, or something more sinister woven into the fabric of their lives? Meanwhile, at Meadowbrook House, the initial shock had hardened into a grim resolve. Sir Arthur Harrington, ensconced in his library amid shelves of leather-bound volumes and the faint aroma of aged paper, stared out the bay window at the manicured lawns stretching toward the woods. The room, panelled in dark oak and adorned with portraits of stern ancestors, felt oppressive now, the ticking of the grandfather clock a relentless reminder of passing time. He had dismissed the servants after the search, save for the butler. Jenkins, who stood discreetly by the door. "Fetch Constable Pauke at once," Sir Arthur commanded, his voice a low rumble, "and telephone the County Inspector Craddock, isn't it? This is no mere prank." Jenkins bowed and departed, leaving Sir Arthur to his thoughts. He sank into his armchair, fingers steepled under his chin. Reginald had always been a source of both pride and exasperation. The boy's charm mirrored his late mother's, but so did his recklessness. Sir Arthur recalled the arguments over finances, the loans from that odious crow, the failed speculations in railway shares. "You'll ruin us," he had warned, but Reginald had laughed it off, promising riches around the corner. Now this was it, flight from marriage, or something darker? A creditor's revenge, perhaps. Geoffrey Blaine entered then, his usual nonchalance frayed at the edges. He had changed from his morning suit into tweeds, but his sandy hair was tousled, and shadows lingered under his eyes. "Any word, Sir Arthur?" he asked, pouring himself a brandy from the decanter with a hand that trembled slightly. Sir Arthur shook his head. Nothing. The boys vanished like mist. "You were with him last. Tell me again about the dinner." Geoffrey recounted the bachelor gathering at the Blue Boar, a merry affair with toasts and ribald stories. Reginald at the centre, his laughter ringing out. He seemed fine excited, even mentioned looking forward to settling down with Eliza. But as he spoke, Geoffrey's gaze drifted to the window, and Sir Arthur noted a hesitation, a flicker of unease. "And after, you walked back together?" "Yes, up the lane. He went straight to bed, or so I thought. I retired to the guest room." Geoffrey sipped his drink, avoiding the older man's eyes. Sir Arthur pressed no further, but doubt seeded in his mind. Geoffrey, ever the loyal friend. yet with a history of borrowing from Reginald, unpaid sums that mounted quietly. Constable Pauc arrived shortly, a burly man in uniform, his bicycle propped against the porch. He listened gravely, notebook in hand, then set about organizing a more thorough search. "We'll check the river, sir, and the old quarry. Accidents happen." But Sir Arthur waved that away. "My son is no fool to wander into danger. Look for signs of intrusion, footprints, perhaps." Inspector Craddock pulled up in a police motor car as the shadows lengthened, his arrival heralded by the crunch of gravel. A man of precise habits, with a lean frame clad in a neat suit and a fedora tipped. At a jaunty angle, he exuded calm authority. Accompanied by 2 constables, he greeted Sir Arthur with a firm handshake. "Nasty business, this. Let's start at the beginning." They adjourned to the library, where Craddock's notebook filled page after page. Timelines, alibis, relationships. "Tell me about enemies," Craddock probed. Sir Arthur mentioned Crow, a shark of a moneylender, and Geoffrey added vague rivals from Reginald's racing days. But Craddock's eyes sharpened on family matters, and the fiancée. "Any quarrels?" Sir Arthur bristled. "Eliza's a gem. Reginald adored her." The search intensified. Constables combed the stables, where hay bales were shifted and tack inspected. The garage, Reginald's motor car, gleaming untouched, its engine cold. In the orchard, amid gnarled apple trees laden with green fruit, a sergeant unearthed a cigar stub, its band bearing Reginald's favored brand. "Smoked recently," he noted, bagging it. The woods proved denser, paths winding through underbrush thick with ferns and brambles. Birds flitted overhead, their calls mocking the men's calls of Harrington. Reginald, no response, only the echo of their voices fading into silence. As dusk approached, the village hummed with gossip. At Mrs. Price's tea shop, a hub of local intelligence, patrons clustered around tables laden with crumpets and pots of Earl Grey. Miss Weatherby, the postmistress, held court. "I saw young Harrington posting a letter yesterday urgent, by the look on his face. To London, it was Mr. Petherick, the solicitor, nodded sagely, and Crow was lurking about. Harrington owed him thousands stocks, gone sour. Wouldn't surprise me if the creditor's hand is in this." Mrs. Bantry, a formidable widow from the manor house, chimed in. "Or that best man, Blaine. Jealous type, if you ask me. Courted Eliza once, didn't he?" The room buzzed with agreement, theories, sprouting like weeds. Elopement with a secret lover, suicide over debts, even a family cover dash-up. Back at Meadowbrook, Craddock conferred with Sir Arthur over sherry. No ransom yet, no body, thank heavens. But motives abound. Debt, rivalry, perhaps romance gone awry. Geoffrey, eavesdropping from the hall, felt a chill. As night fell, lamps flickering in the windows, the shadow of doubt deepened, ensnaring, all in its web. In St. Mary Mead, where secrets nestled like hidden nests, the truth lay buried, awaiting a discerning hand to unearth it. Chapter 3. The Reluctant Guests. The following morning dawned with a muted greyness over St. Mary Mead, as if the sky itself mourned the disruption of what should have been a celebratory union. A light mist clung to the meadows, veiling the distant spire of All Saints' Church and softening the outlines of the cottages that dotted the landscape. At Meadowbrook House, the household stirred early, though the usual rhythms of daily life felt disjointed, overshadowed by the enigma of Reginald. Harrington's absence. Servants moved about with subdued footsteps. exchanging glances laden with unspoken questions, while the aroma of breakfast bacon and toast wafted from the kitchen. A feeble attempt at normalcy. Sir Arthur Harrington, having passed a restless night in his study, emerged with dark circles under his eyes, his moustache drooping like a wilted flower. He had pored over old letters and account books until the small hours, searching for any clue to his son's state of mind, but found only reminders of Reginald's profligacy, receipts from London clubs, IOUs scribbled in hasty hand. Now, as he sat at the dining table, picking at a plate of kedgeree, the doorbell chimed a sound that jolted him from his reverie. Jenkins, the butler, announced the arrival of Inspector Craddock, who entered with his customary briskness, hat in hand and notebook at the ready. "Good morning, Sir Arthur," Craddock said, accepting a cup of coffee proffered by a maid. "I've come to continue our inquiries. The constables will resume searching the grounds at first light, but I thought we might speak with the household staff first. Often, it's the small details they notice." Sir Arthur nodded wearily, gesturing for Jenkins to summon the servants. One by one, they filed in. The housekeeper, Mrs. Ellis, stout and sensible in her black dress. The footman, young Tom, fidgety and wide-eyed. The maids, including little Annie, who twisted her apron in nervous hands. Mrs. Ellis spoke first, her voice steady. "Master Reginald was in fine fettle the night before, sir. He dined lightly said. He didn't want to overdo it before the big day and retired early. I heard him humming as he went up the stairs." Tom corroborated this, adding that he'd polished the groom's shoes and left them outside the door, only to find them untouched in the morning. Annie, blushing under the inspector's gaze, ventured a tidbit. "I saw Mr. Blaine lingering in the hall after midnight, sir. Looked like he was listening at the door." Craddock jotted this down, his expression neutral, though it planted a seed of suspicion regarding Geoffrey's movements as the interviews concluded. Another visitor was announced. Raymond West, Sir Arthur's distant nephew by marriage, a novelist of moderate success known for his penchant for dramatic tales. Raymond, a dapper man in his 30s, with a neatly trimmed beard and an air of intellectual detachment, had been invited to the wedding as a courtesy to family ties. He arrived by motor car from the neighbouring town of Much Benham, where he resided, in a modern bungalow that clashed somewhat with the rustic charm of the countryside. "Uncle Arthur," he exclaimed upon entering the drawing-room, "what a dreadful affair! I heard the news at the station and came straight away. Is there any sign of Reggie?" Sir Arthur greeted him with a gruff handshake, outlining the scant details. Known thus far. Raymond listened intently, his writer's mind already weaving narratives of intrigue. "It sounds like something out of one of my plots. Vanishing Groom, hidden motives. But real life is stranger, they say." He paused, then added, "I've brought my aunt along. She's staying with me for the week. Thought her presence might comfort. The lady's Miss Marple, you know." At the mention of the name, Sir Arthur's brow furrowed slightly. Miss Jane Marple was a figure well known in St. Mary Mead circles, a frail-looking spinster of indeterminate age, with fluffy white hair, china blue eyes, and an unerring knack for observing the foibles of human nature. She lived in a neat cottage on the high street, surrounded by her knitting and her garden, and though she seldom ventured far, her insights into village scandals had proven remarkably acute on more than one occasion. Sir Arthur had met her at garden parties and teas, dismissing her as a harmless gossip, but Raymond insisted. "Aunt Jane has a way with puzzles. She won't intrude, but perhaps she could chat with Eliza." Reluctantly, Sir Arthur acquiesced, and Miss Marple was ushered in. She entered with a light step, clad in a tweed skirt and a cardigan of soft wool. A brooch pinned at her throat and a capacious handbag over one arm. "Dear Sir Arthur," she said in her gentle voice, "how terribly distressing. This must be for you. And poor Miss Thornton's, such a sweet girl. I remember her as a child, always so composed." She settled into a chintz armchair, extracting her knitting needles and a ball of pale blue yarn from her bag, her fingers beginning their rhythmic dance almost at once. Raymond, eager to play the detective, regaled the group with his theories. Over luncheon a cold collation served in the dining room to avoid the fuss of a formal meal. Perhaps Reggie staged it himself, he suggested, spearing a slice of ham, elopement with a mystery woman, or to escape creditors. "I've heard whispers of debts." Sir Arthur shot him a stern look. "Nonsense, boy. My son is no scoundrel." Miss Marple, knitting quietly in the corner, said nothing, but her eyes twinkled behind her spectacles as she absorbed the conversation. Geoffrey Blaine joined them midway through the meal, his face drawn from lack of sleep. He had spent the morning walking the estate, ostensibly searching for clues, but his dishevelled appearance suggested inner turmoil. "Any developments, Inspector?" he asked, taking a seat and accepting a plate. Craddock, who had lingered for the repast, shook his head. "Not yet, but we'll interview the wedding guests soon, those who were close to Reginald." Geoffrey nodded, though his fork toyed with the food rather than conveying it to his mouth. In the afternoon, Eliza Thornton arrived, escorted by her father. She had changed into a simple grey dress, her hair pulled back severely, accentuating the pallor of her features. Colonel Thornton blustered in ahead of her, demanding updates. "Craddock, man, what have you found?" "Footprints, a note." The inspector outlined the morning's efforts, then gently steered Eliza to a sofa for questioning. "Miss Thornton, can you think of any reason Reginald might have ... departed?" Eliza's hands clenched in her lap. "None. We were happy planning our future, though ... She hesitated, glancing at her father. "There was a small disagreement a few days ago. Reginald had been secretive about trips to London. Business, he said, but I worried it was more debts." The room fell silent, save for the click of Miss Marple's needles. Geoffrey interjected quickly. "Reggie mentioned it to me nothing serious. Just sorting investments." But his reassurance rang hollow, and Craddock noted it down as the day wore on. More reluctant guests filtered in, ushers from the bachelor party, villagers who had seen Reginald recently. Each added fragments a sighting near the post office. An overheard argument with Crow, but no coherent picture emerged. Miss Marple, unobtrusive as a shadow, listened to all, her mind drawing parallels to past village dramas. A missing farmer, lured by false promises, a jilted lover's revenge. By evening, as the mist thickened outside, the group dispersed. Raymond drove Miss Marple home, chattering about the case. "What do you make of it, Aunt Jane?" She smiled faintly. "People are like my knitting," Raymond patterns repeat, "and often the loose thread is right under one's nose." In the quiet of Meadowbrook House, the shadow of doubt lingered, but with Miss Marple's arrival, a glimmer of clarity began to pierce the veil. Chapter 4. Whispers of motive. The mist that had cloaked St. Mary Mead the previous day lifted by mid-morning, revealing a sky of unblemished blue that belied the undercurrents of suspicion now swirling through the village. At Meadowbrook House, Inspector Craddock wasted no time in advancing his investigation, transforming the elegant morning room into a makeshift interview parlour. The room, with its French windows opening onto the terrace and walls adorned with watercolors of pastoral scenes, offered a deceptive air of serenity. A low table bore a silver tray with tea things, but the atmosphere was far from convivial, as the suspects, though Craddock refrained from labelling them as such, were summoned one by one. First came Eliza Thornton, accompanied by her father, who insisted on remaining present despite Craddock's polite suggestion otherwise. Eliza, still in sombre grey, seated herself on the edge of a velvet chair, her posture rigid as a statue. "Miss Thornton," Craddock began, his tone measured and reassuring, "I understand this is difficult, but any detail might help. Tell me about your last conversation with Mr. Harrington." Eliza's eyes, rimmed with fatigue, met his briefly before, dropping to her folded hands. "It was 2 evenings ago, after dinner here. We walked in the garden. Reginald spoke of our honeymoon in Paris, how he'd show me the Eiffel Tower at night. He seemed distracted though. Mentioned a letter he needed to post urgently." Craddock leaned forward. "Distracted how? Worried?" Eliza hesitated, glancing at the Colonel, who nodded encouragement. "Perhaps he'd been to London thrice that week business," he said. "But we quarrelled mildly. I accused him of secrets. He laughed it off, kissed me, and promised all would be well after the wedding." Her voice cracked slightly, and she dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Craddock noted her composure genuine grief, or a veil for something else. "And his finances? Were you aware of debts?" The Colonel interjected gruffly. "Harrington was no pauper, Inspector. Eliza's inheritance is modest. It wasn't about money." But Eliza's flush suggested otherwise, and Craddock filed it away. As Eliza departed, her father muttering about damned impertinence, Geoffrey Blaine entered, his lanky frame slouching into the chair with feigned nonchalance. He lit a cigarette, inhaling deeply before meeting Craddock's gaze. "Fire away, Inspector. I've nothing to hide." Craddock smiled thinly. "Your friendship with Reginald close, I gather." Geoffrey nodded. "Since school. Brothers, almost. I'd do anything for him, including cover for his indiscretions." Craddock probed. Geoffrey's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" The inspector referenced village talk, Geoffrey's past affection for Eliza. A brief courtship ended when Reginald swept in. "Jealousy can fester," Craddock observed. Geoffrey stubbed out his cigarette sharply. "Rubbish. I was happy for them stood. As best man, didn't I? Sure, I teased Reggie about settling down, but that's banter." Yet his fingers drummed the armrest, and Craddock pressed on Reginald's loans to Geoffrey unrepaid sums. "He never pressed me," Geoffrey insisted. "Said we'd square it later." As he left, Craddock pondered. Loyalty or leverage? Sir Arthur Harrington. Followed, his bearing stiff, as he settled opposite Craddock. "This is intolerable," he boomed. "My son missing, and you grilling us like criminals." Craddock remained unruffled. "Routine, sir. Your relationship with Reginald." Sir Arthur's moustache twitched. Proud father, but stern. The boys' wild cars, stocks. "I disapproved of the match initially. Eliza's fine, but he needed discipline, not wedlock." Craddock raised an eyebrow. "Disapproved enough to intervene." Sir Arthur's face reddened. "Absurd. I'd cut him off before, but he always charmed his way back." Debts surfaced again, sir. Arthur had bailed Reginald out repeatedly. Last time, I refused. Told him to face consequences. A motive for staging a disappearance. Craddock wondered. The final interview was with Silas Crowe, summoned from his dingy office in the village high street. Crowe slunk in, his thin frame clad in a threadbare suit, eyes darting like a cornered animal. "I ain't done nothing," he snarled preemptively, perching on the chair's edge. Craddock eyed him coolly. "Mr. Harrington owed you money, £5,000, by accounts." Crowe nodded grudgingly. "Loans for his ventures. Overdue, yes, but I'd not harm him. Sent reminders, that's all. Witnesses placed them, arguing fiercely. Days prior, voices raised in the Blue Boar. He begged extension. Crowe admitted. I refused. Business is business." Craddock leaned in. "Where were you the morning of the wedding?" Crowe claimed his office, alone. "No alibi," Craddock noted, dismissing him with a warning to stay local. Miss Marple, who had remained at Meadowbrook at Raymond's insistence, observed these proceedings. From the adjoining conservatory, her knitting a constant companion, she had chatted with the maids earlier, gleaning tidbits. A overheard snatch of Geoffrey's envy, Sir Arthur's late-night pacing. Now, as Craddock joined her for tea, she ventured softly, "Human motives, Inspector, are like garden weeds and varied." Craddock, respecting her reputation, shared outlines. Jealousy from Blaine, control from the father, doubt from the bride, greed from Crowe, but no proof. Raymond West, ever the enthusiast, proposed a drive to London to trace trips. He mentioned a club, the Pegasus. Perhaps clues there. Miss Marple demurred, preferring village lanes, but encouraged Raymond. "Go, dear. Young legs for city pavements." As Raymond departed, she strolled the garden with Eliza, who unburdened slightly. Reginald feared his father's wrath over debts. "But he loved Mead, didn't he?" Miss Marple patted her hand. "Love wears many masks, my dear." Village whispers amplified. At the tea shop, Mrs. Bantry speculated on Crowe's shady dealings. Mr. Petherick recalled a similar case of debt-driven vanishing. Constable Pock reported a new leader villager spotting a dark car near the woods Predon. Craddock investigated, finding tyre marks, but rain had blurred them by evening. As lamps glowed in Meadowbrook's windows, tensions simmered. Geoffrey confronted Sir Arthur privately. "You think I did it?" The old man sighed. "I think nothing yet." Eliza retired early, haunted by doubts. Miss Marple, knitting by the fire, reflected on Paralauser, jilted suitor's plot in her youth. "A father's overreach, whispers," she murmured, "often shout the truth." The day closed with Craddock poring over notes, the web of motives tightening. In St. Mary Mead, secrets whispered on, awaiting revelation. Chapter 5. A Clue in the Garden. The sun burned off the last remnants of morning haze, as Inspector Craddock expanded his net beyond the confines of Meadowbrook House, directing his constables to canvass the village lanes and byways of St. Mary Mead. The air hummed with the low buzz of activity, villagers pausing in their chores to offer scraps of information, their voices a blend of concern and barely concealed excitement at being part of such a drama. Miss Marple, ever the unobtrusive observer, had taken it upon herself to accompany one such party, her sensible shoes treading the familiar paths with the ease of long habit. "A stroll does wonders for the mind," she remarked to Raymond West, who had returned from his fruitless London jaunt and now trailed her like an eager pupil. Their first stop was the post office, a cramped establishment presided over by Miss Weatherby, whose sharp eyes missed little behind her pince-nez. She greeted Miss Marple with the deference due a village elder. "Dreadful about young Harrington, isn't it? And on his wedding day?" Miss Marple nodded sympathetically, inquiring gently about any recent sightings. Miss Weatherby leaned across the counter, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He was in here the afternoon before posting a letter to London, registered and urgent. Looked quite out of sorts. He did, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting someone. Raymond pressed for details. The address. A firm in the city stockbrokers. I believe, Harrington & Co., or something similar. Miss Marple thanked her, tucking the tidbit away like a precious skein of wool. From there, they wandered to the tea shop, where Mrs. Price served up scones alongside speculation. Crow was seen arguing with him again, she confided, wiping her hands on her apron. Outside the inn, voices raised about money. Other patrons chimed in. A farmer recalled Reginald walking briskly toward the woods the evening prior, alone, but purposeful. Miss Marple listened, her blue eyes keen, drawing mental threads between these fragments and the motives unearthed the day before. Back at Meadowbrook House, the search of the grounds yielded its first tangible clue. A young constable, poking about near the summer-house, a quaint pavilion, nestled among rhododendrons at the garden's edge, let out a triumphant call. "Inspector, over here." Craddock hurried over, followed by Sir Arthur and Geoffrey Blaine. The constable held aloft a single leather glove, supple and well-worn, monogrammed with the initials R.H. in elegant script. Found it tangled in the bushes, sir. And look, footprints leading away toward the road. Craddock knelt to examine the site. The glove showed no tears or bloodstains, merely a light dusting of soil. The footprints, clear in the soft earth, were of a man's size, spaced evenly as if walking, not running. They trailed off to the gravel lane bordering the estate, where faint tire impressions suggested a vehicle had idled, recently perhaps, a motor car. Judging by the width, abduction, Craddock mused aloud, straightening up. No evident struggle. But he might have been lured or coerced. Sir Arthur's face paled. My boy's glove, no doubt. He always wore them for driving. Word spread swiftly, drawing Elisa and the Colonel to the scene. Elisa gasped at the sight, her hand flying to her. Mouth, that's his. I gave him the pair for his birthday. Geoffrey placed a supportive arm around her shoulders, murmuring comforts, but Miss Marple, who had returned in time to witness this, noted the gesture's familiarity and how Eliza leaned into it just a fraction too readily. Inspector Craddock permitted Miss Marple a closer look at the glove, respecting her growing involvement. She turned it over delicately, sniffing the leather subtly. Interesting, she murmured. No scent of chloroform or restraint. And this mud on the cuff, it's clayish, not like the loamy soil here in the garden. More akin to the riverbank clay. I'd say. She handed it back, her mind drifting to a case from her girlhood in the village. A wayward heir enticed to a meeting under pretense of aid, only to be waylaid by schemers. People are so trusting when hope is offered, she said softly. To Raymond. As the group dispersed, a maid approached Eliza hesitantly, bearing a plain envelope. This came in the post, Miss, addressed to you. Elisa opened it with trembling fingers, her face draining of color as she read the scrawled message. Forget him, he's not worth it. A wisher, the note, on cheap paper, bore no postmark, suggesting hand delivery. Who could be so cruel? She whispered, crumpling it. Geoffrey snatched it up, his expression thunderous. Some coward's prank. Pay it no mind, Eliza. But Craddock, taking possession, noted the block letter's disguised handwriting, perhaps the timing suspiciously apt. The anonymous missive stirred fresh suspicions. Sir Arthur viewed it as a creditor's taunt. Pointing anew at Crow, Geoffrey suggested a rival suitor, though his eyes avoided Eliza's. The Colonel blustered about tracing the paper to the village stationer. Miss Marple, over afternoon tea in the drawing-room, pondered aloud to Craddock. Such notes often stem from intimate knowledge, someone who knows the heart's vulnerabilities. She recalled a similar poison pen episode in St. Mary Mead years back, where the sender's motive was not malice but misdirection. Craddock dispatched a constable to query the stationer and re-examine the tyre tracks, while Raymond volunteered to telephone the London stockbrokers about Reginald's letter. Might be a lead on his worries. As evening fell, the garden clue and the note hung like storm clouds, deepening the enigma. In the quiet conservatory, Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily, weaving patterns in yarn that mirrored the tangled threads of deceit around her. The village, abuzz with the discoveries, settled into watchful waiting, aware that in human affairs, clues were but stepping stones to hidden truths. Chapter 6. Secrets unveiled. The journey to London unfolded under a canopy of scudding clouds. The motorcar humming along the winding roads that led from the serene lanes of St. Mary Mead to the bustling thoroughfares of the capital. Raymond West, gripping the steering wheel with the enthusiasm of a man on a literary quest, glanced sideways at his aunt. Miss Marple sat primly in the passenger seat, her hands folded over her handbag, her gaze fixed on the passing countryside, as if it held the answers to life's myriad puzzles. "Aunt Jane," Raymond ventured, "do you really think Reginald's London trips hold the key? It seems a long shot." Miss Marple smiled faintly, her voice carrying over the engine's rumble. "Long shots, my dear, often hit the mark when aimed with care. People leave trails in cities as surely as in villages' debts, dalliances, desperations." They arrived in the heart of Mayfair by midday, navigating the crowded streets to the Pegasus Club, a discreet establishment tucked behind an unassuming facade of Georgian brick. The club catered to gentlemen of means or those aspiring to such, with its panelled lounges, leather armchairs, and the perpetual haze of cigar smoke. Raymond, flashing his card as a member through distant connections, gained entry, Miss Marple trailing behind like a benign chaperone. The doorman eyed her curiously but said nothing. In London, eccentricity was currency. Inside they were directed to the bar, where a portly bartender named Higgins polished glasses with practiced efficiency. Raymond ordered sodas. Miss Marple, demurring anything stronger, and inquired casually about Reginald Harrington. Higgins's eyes narrowed in recognition. "Ah, young Mr. Harrington. Regular here. He was poker nights, mostly. Bit of a plunger, if you know what I mean." Pressed further, Higgins leaned in, his voice dropping. "Owed a fair bit, not just to the house, but to some unsavory types. Bookies from the East End, shady investors. Last time I saw him week ago he was deep in it, talking wild about skipping out, eloping maybe, to start fresh abroad. Can't face the music, he said." Poor lad looked haunted. Miss Marple listened without interruption, her expression one of mild interest, though her mind catalogued every word. Gambling debts beyond Crow's lone scattered obligations that could ensnare a man like a net. "Did he mention names?" she asked softly. Higgins shook his head. "Nah, but there was a chap here tall, scar on his cheek, pressing him hard. Harrington left in a hurry after that." Raymond thanked the man with a tip, and they departed. The club's opulence now tainted by the whiff of desperation. En route back to St. Mary Mead, Raymond mulled the revelations. Gambling that explains the secrecy, but eloping with Eliza, waiting at the altar. Miss Marple adjusted her hat against the wind. Elopement implies flight, Raymond, but from what? Debts, disgrace, or something closer to home. They stopped for luncheon at a roadside inn, where Miss Marple's thoughts turned to village parallels. A local squire ruined by cards, vanishing to the colonies, leaving chaos behind. Upon their return to Meadowbrook House in the late afternoon, the atmosphere buzzed with fresh developments. Inspector Craddock had spent the day re-interviewing witnesses, his notebook brimming with inconsistencies. Sir Arthur Harrington, cornered in his library by the inspector's persistent questions, finally unburdened a long-held family secret. Seated behind his desk, a portrait of his late wife gazing down sternly, Sir Arthur's voice cracked with reluctance. My wife Reginald's mother, she wasn't the saint the village remembers. Ran off 20 years ago with a bounder from town, leaving debts that nearly bankrupted us. Dressmakers, jewelers' frivolities piled high. I covered it all, shielded the boy from the truth. But lately, I've feared he inherited her ways. The recklessness, the evasion. Craddock's eyes sharpened. You think he staged this to avoid similar shame? Sir Arthur buried his face in his hands. God knows. But if debts mounted, as you say, the confession rippled through the household. Eliza, overhearing from the hall, confronted Sir Arthur tearfully. You never told him. He carried that burden unknowingly. The old man nodded miserably, the weight of years evident in his slumped shoulders. Geoffrey Blaine, lingering nearby, offered no comment, but his pallor suggested the news struck a chord. Craddock turned next to Geoffrey, summoning him to the morning room for a private grilling. Your debts to Reginald admit them fully, the inspector demanded, producing a ledger unearthed from Reginald's desk. Geoffrey shifted uncomfortably. His usual charm evaporated. All right, yes, £1,000, borrowed over time. Investments gone sour, you see. But Reggie understood. Said we'd settle after his marriage, with Eliza's dowry perhaps. Craddock pounced. Convenient, if he vanished. And your alibi? That solitary walk, no one saw you. Geoffrey flushed. I swear, I was clearing my head. I'd never betray him, he's like kin. Yet his eyes darted, and Craddock dismissed him with a warning. Lies unravel, Mr. Blaine. Miss Marple, apprised of these unveilings over tea in the conservatory, pondered the mosaic forming before her. Raymond relayed the London findings, and she nodded thoughtfully, her teacup poised midway. Human nature, Raymond greed tugs one way, jealousy another, fear binding them all. Reginald's mother fleeing debts, his own mirroring that path, and Mr. Blaine's borrowings opportunistic, perhaps. She recalled a case from her nephew's tales, a friend burdened by loans, turning desperate. Webs indeed, she murmured, as the sun dipped low, casting elongated shadows across the lawns. Evening brought a tense dinner, suspicions hanging like fog. Silas Crowe was spotted skulking near the gate, denying further involvement when questioned. Eliza retired early, haunted by visions of Reginald's hidden life. In her cottage that night, Miss Marple reviewed the secrets laid bare, sensing the puzzle's edges aligning. The village, alive with rumours of London vices and family skeletons, awaited the next twist in this tapestry of deception. Chapter 7. The false Trelay sense of urgency gripped St. Mary Mead as the investigation into Reginald Harrington's disappearance entered its third day. The village's usual placidity fractured by the comings and goings of police constables and the ceaseless murmur of speculation. Inspector Craddock, fortified by a hearty breakfast, at the Blue Boar arrived at Meadowbrook House with renewed determination, his team in tow. The anonymous note and the garden glove had ignited fresh lines of inquiry, but it was a tip from a neighbouring hamlet that promised a genuine breakthrough. A farmhand from Gossington, cycling home late the previous evening, had telephoned the station with a sighting, a man matching Reginald's description, arguing heatedly with another resembling Silas Crowe, near a dilapidated cottage on the outskirts of the woods. Craddock wasted no time. "We'll raid the place at once," he declared to Sir Arthur, who nodded grimly, his face etched with a mix of hope and dread. Geoffrey Blaine volunteered to accompany them, his eagerness bordering on insistence. "If Reggie's there, I want to be the first to see him safe." Eliza, pale but resolute, insisted on waiting at the house with her father, while Miss Marple and Raymond West observed from the sidelines, the spinster's keen eyes missing nothing of the assembled tension. The cottage in question squatted forlornly at the end of a rutted track, its thatched roof sagging like a weary brow, windows bordered against prying eyes. Craddock's men approached stealthily, fanning out to surround the property. With a nod, the inspector hammered on the door. "Police. Open up." Silence greeted them, broken only by the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Forcing entry, they burst into the dim interior. A single room furnished sparsely with a rickety table, a cot, and the remnants of a hasty meal, bread crumbs, and an empty bottle of ale. Evidence abounded. In a corner, coils of rope lay tangled, their fibres fresh and unwithered. Nearby, a cloth rag exuded the sharp odour of chloroform, its bottle discarded under the cot. Geoffrey stooped to examine it, his face ashen. "Good Lord, this screams kidnapping." Craddock's search uncovered more, a scrap of paper bearing Reginald's handwriting, a half-drafted plea for funds, and a wallet containing Crowe's business card. "It's him," Craddock muttered, bagging the items. "Crowe's our man." But of Reginald himself, there was no trace, no hidden cellar, no signs of recent occupancy beyond the debris. Word raced back to the village, and Silas Crowe was hauled in for questioning before noon. He arrived at the makeshift station in the village hall, flanked by constables, his gaunt features twisted in outrage. "This is harassment," he snarled, slamming a fist on the table as Craddock laid out the evidence. "That cottage, rent it for storage tools, nothing more. Haven't been there in weeks." His alibi for the sighting. At his office, poring over ledgers, alone as usual. The ropes for bundling goods, the chloroform, rat poison, solventask, any farmer. As for the wallet card, Harrington must have dropped it during a visit. Craddock pressed hard, but Crowe held firm, his denials laced with sneers. "You think I'd risk jail for a welcher like him? I'd sue first." Released pending further proof, Crowe slunk away, leaving Craddock frustrated. Slippery as an eel, he confided to Miss Marple, who had wandered to the hall under pretence of delivering tea from the rectory. She examined the seized items with permission, her fingers tracing the rope's weave. "Curious," she murmured. "These Nazi freshly tied, but nowhere from binding. And that chloroform scent potent, as if applied recently. For our benefit." Raymond, hovering nearby, caught her drift. "A plant to throw us off." Miss Marple visited the cottage herself that afternoon, Raymond driving her along the bumpy lane. The place reeked of disuse, dust motes dancing in shafts of light from cracked boards. She noted the fresh paint on one wall, patchy and hurried, concealing perhaps a message or mark, and their faint aroma lingering near the hearth, not chloroform but pipe tobacco, rich and distinctive, Sir Arthur's blend, she whispered, recalling the old man's habit, or someone's imitation. Outside, footprints circled the building, multiple sets, some recent, suggesting staged activity. Back at Meadowbrook, Eliza's composure frayed further. In the drawing room, she confessed to Geoffrey over sherry, her voice trembling. Reginald proposed so suddenly after learning of my aunt's legacy. Did he love me, or the security? Geoffrey's hand covered hers, his tone soothing yet intense. He loved you, Eliza, don't doubt that. But Miss Marple, entering quietly, observed the intimacy, her mind flitting to a village romance where haste masked mercenary intent. Craddock pursued other angles. The London stockbrokers confirmed Reginald's letter, begged for extensions on margins, hinting at ruin. A telegram from the Pegasus Club named a scarred creditor, a known enforcer, but alibied in the city. False trails abounded. Craddock grumbled at dinner. Every lead circles back to nothing. Miss Marple, knitting by the fire as the group gathered, ventured a thought. Trails, Inspector, are like garden paths. Some lead to the rosebed, others to the compost heap. This one feels contrived, a diversion from truer sense. She recalled a case of misdirection in her youth, a staged robbery to mask embezzlement. As night fell, the false trail lingered, a smokescreen veiling deeper deceptions in the heart of St. Mary Mead. Chapter 8. Threads converged. Twilight descended upon Meadowbrook House like a velvet curtain. The gardens bathed in the soft hues of fading light as Inspector Craddock orchestrated the gathering in the drawing-room. The air was thick with anticipation, the sort that precedes a storm, as servants discreetly arranged chairs in a semicircle facing the grand fireplace. Logs crackled merrily, casting flickering shadows that danced across the faces of those assembled. Sir Arthur Harrington, stern and unyielding in his wing-back chair. Eliza Thornton, fragile yet composed beside her father, the Colonel's whiskers twitching with impatience. Geoffrey Blaine, lounging against the mantel with affected ease, though his eyes betrayed a wariness. And Silas Crowe, summoned under protest, his lean form hunched in a corner seat like a coiled spring. Miss Marple occupied a modest spot near the window, her knitting bag at her feet, needles idle for once as she surveyed the room with those deceptively mild blue eyes. Raymond West hovered nearby, notebook in hand, ever the chronicler of human drama. Craddock stood at the centre, his notebook replaced by a sheaf of papers, reports, statements, the accumulated weight of inquiries. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady, "we've pursued every lead. The glove, the note, the cottage. Ruse, it's time to lay the cards on the table." He commenced with the evidence, his tone methodical. The glove in the garden deliberately placed, analysis showed, with clay from elsewhere to mislead. The anonymous note traced to paper from the village stationer, but fingerprints absent. The cottage, ropes and chloroform staged. The tobacco sent a clumsy feint toward Sir Arthur. Someone, Craddock declared, wished to point us as abduction, perhaps, but with inconsistencies that scream fabrication. Accusations erupted like sparks from the fire. Sir Arthur fixed Geoffrey with a glare. "You, Blaine, always envious of my boy. Courted Eliza yourself, didn't you? And those unpaid debts motive enough to remove him?" Geoffrey straightened, his face flushing. "Preposterous. I'd lay down my life for Reggie. If anyone's to blame, it's you. Old man driving him to despair with your constant harping on family honour, hiding your wife's scandals." The Colonel bristled. "Watch your tongue, sir. My daughter's no schemer, but that creditor there, he jabbed a finger at Crow. Extortion's your game, Crow. Reginald owed you a fortune. You staged this to squeeze more. Crow sneered, his eyes glittering. Fools, all of you. I'd collect legally before risking my neck. Look to the bride, hasty proposal, whispers of doubt. Perhaps she discovered his gambling and decided to end it dramatically. Eliza gasped, rising halfway from her seat. How dare you? One loved Reginald still do. If jealousy poisoned anyone, it's you, Geoffrey, consoling me a bit too eagerly. Geoffrey recoiled as if struck. Eliza, no, I only meant to help. The room dissolved into a cacophony of recriminations, voices overlapping in a tapestry of blame. Craddock raised his hands for silence, but it was Miss Marple's soft interjection that cut through the din. Dear me, she said, her voice like a gentle breeze, such passion. Yet passion often blinds us to the simpler truths. All eyes turned to her, the unassuming spinster who had listened more than spoken these past days. She adjusted her spectacles, continuing calmly. This isn't murder we face, thank heavens, but something baser greed, yes, but laced with fear and cunning misdirection. She outlined the threads. Reginald's debts, not just to Crow, but sprawled across London dens. The family secrets fueling. Flight jealousies simmering beneath friendships. Doubts eroding love. But see how they converge not in violence, but in a calculated ploy to extort and silence. Craddock nodded encouragement, sensing her grasp on the elusive pattern. Raymond leaned forward, enthralled. As Miss Marple's words wove the disparate clues into coherence, the room hanging on her every syllable. Outside, the night deepened, stars pricking the sky like distant witnesses. In St. Mary Mead, where lives, intertwined like ivy, the convergence of threads promised unravelling at last. Chapter 9. The Hidden Truth. The drawing-room at Meadowbrook House fell into a hush as Miss Marple's words lingered, her gentle tone belying the sharpness of her insights. Inspector Craddock, sensing the pivotal moment, inclined his head toward her. Miss Marple, if you have a theory, now's the time. She folded her hands in her lap, her gaze sweeping the assembled faces, etched with a unique blend of defiance, fear, and curiosity. A theory, merely observations, Inspector, drawn from the patterns of life I've seen repeated so often in our little village. But perhaps a few questions might clarify matters. She turned first to Silas Crow, who shifted uncomfortably under her scrutiny. Mr. Crow, might we have a private word? In the library, sight's quieter there. Crow hesitated, his eyes flicking to Craddock for rescue, but the inspector nodded curtly. Go on, I'll join shortly. The pair retreated to the adjacent library, where shelves of dusty tomes absorbed their voices. Miss Marple settled into an armchair, gesturing for Crow to do the same. Now, sir, you've been forthright about the debt's £5,000, was it? But lurking near the house on the wedding eve, a creditor's vigilance, or something more? Crow mopped his brow with a grimy handkerchief, his bravado crumbling. All right, I was there watching for a chance to corner him, demand payment, but I swear I left before midnight. Saw nothing amiss. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. And your ledger, might I see it? Discrepancies can be so revealing. Reluctantly, Crow produced a battered book from his coat, its pages crammed with scrawled entries. She leafed through, her finger pausing on several lines. These payments marked as received from Reginald, but the ink fresh, the handwriting not quite his, is it? Forged, perhaps, to inflate the debt. Crow's face drained of colour. He tried to forge receipts himself, to stall me. Caught him at it last week. But I didn't. Miss Marple closed the book softly. Didn't what? Resort to extremes. We shall see. Their conference was interrupted by the butler's entrance, bearing a telegram on a silver salver. Urgent, sir, from the county police. Craddock, who had slipped in unnoticed, tore it open, his expression shifting from surprise to action. Reginald. Harrington sighted at the Fox and Hounds in 10 miles hence. Alive, but in distress. A collective gasp echoed through the house as word spread. Sir Arthur rose unsteadily. My boy alive. Eliza clutched her father's arm, tears welling. Geoffrey volunteered his motor car. I'll drive, we must hurry. The party set off in haste. Craddock, Sir Arthur, Geoffrey, and Raymond, with Miss Marple, insisting on accompanying despite protests. An old woman's intuition might prove useful, she said firmly. The inn, a ramshackle establishment on a lonely moorland road, loomed in the gathering dusk, its sign creaking in the wind. The landlord, a grizzled man with a limp, met them at the door. He's here, stumbled in an hour ago, bruised and babbling. Locked himself in the back room, won't come out. They forced the door to find Reginald Harrington slumped in a chair, wrists chafed from bonds, his face gaunt and shadowed by stubble. He looked up blearily as Sir Arthur embraced him. Father, thank God. Eliza, arriving moments later in a second car, rushed to his side, her sobs mingling with his weak assurances. Eliza, darling, I'm sorry. Craddock knelt beside him. What happened, man? Who did this? Reginald's voice rasped, halting. It was Crow. Ambushed me in the garden that morning. Chloroform, I think. Woke in a shed somewhere, tied up. Demanded ransom for the debts. Threatened worse if I didn't pay. Managed to escape when he stepped out, ran here. Crow, dragged along under guard, protested vehemently. Lies. I've not left the village. But Reginald pointed accusingly. It was why I saw your face. Miss Marple, standing quietly in the doorway, frowned, her brow furrowed in thought. She examined Reginald's wrist, snow-deep cuts, merely superficial marks. Curious, she murmured to Raymond. No signs of prolonged struggle, as one might expect. From days in captivity, and that glove left in the garden deliberately placed, perhaps, to suggest foul play without committing to it. She approached Reginald gently. Dear boy, your story is compelling, but the details, the chloroform, the cottage was fresh, staged, and your letter to London begging for time on debts. Was escape truly your plan, or something orchestrated? Reginald's eyes widened, but he held firm. I don't know what you mean. Yet Miss Marple persisted, her voice soft but insistent. Human frailties, you see, they lead us astray. Debts mounting, a wedding looming, family expectations crushing. Perhaps a staged vanishing to garner sympathy, extract funds from father or fiancé. The room tensed, eyes turning to Reginald. Sir Arthur stepped back, horror dawning. Reggie, is it true? Under the weight of stares, Reginald crumpled. Not entirely. Crow did approach me, but we, colluded. He helped stage it for a cut of the ransom. I couldn't face the ruin, the shame. Crow cornered, spat confirmation, his idea, forge. The ledgers faked the kidnap, split the payout. Eliza recoiled, her face ashen. You used MAOS. All. Geoffrey's fist clenched, but Miss Marple intervened. Not murder, but deceit. A hidden truth buried under layers of desperation. Craddock arrested both men, the inn's dim light casting long shadows on the scene. As they departed, Miss Marple sighed. So like that affair with the missing banker greed masking fear. But truth outs in time. The drive back was silent, the hidden truth laid bare, leaving wounds that would scar the hearts of St. Mary Mead. Chapter 10. The revelation, the return to Meadowbrook House, was a somber procession. The motorcar's headlights cutting through the inky night like accusatory fingers. Reginald Harrington, supported by his father and Geoffrey Blaine, was installed. In the drawing room, a blanket draped over his shoulders and a brandy pressed into his hand by the solicitous Jenkins. Eliza hovered nearby, her initial relief giving way to a storm of conflicting emotions, betrayal chief among them. Inspector Craddock paced before the fireplace, his mind a whirlwind of details, while Miss Marple settled quietly into her accustomed chair, her presence a calming anchor amid the turbulence. Once all were assembled, including Silas Crowe, now under formal arrest and guarded by a constable. Craddock cleared his throat. "Mr. Harrington, your account demands scrutiny. Start. From the beginning, no omissions." Reginald, his voice steadier now, recounted the tale, the pre-dawn summons to the garden via a forged note purporting to be from Eliza. The sudden assault, awakening in a remote shed, bound and blindfolded. Crowe was there demanding, I sign, over assets, threatening exposure of my debts. He left to fetch papers. I worked free and fled. Crowe, handcuffed in the corner, erupted. Fantasy. The boys spinning yarns to cover his own schemes. Miss Marple interjected softly, her tone inviting confidence. Indeed, schemes abound. But let us examine the evidence afresh. She produced the ledger from her handbag, laying it open on the low table. These forgeries not Reginald's handiwork, Mr. Crowe, but yours. Inflated loans, fabricated interest to extort beyond legitimate claims. Crowe snarled denial, but Miss Marple continued undeterred. And the mailed letter intercepted, I suspect, not to stockbrokers, as assumed, but to authorities in London, reporting your fraudulent practices. Reginald had discovered them during his trips overheard conversations at the Pegasus Club, perhaps. Reginald's facade cracked, his gaze dropping. Yes, ... I found proof ledgers, copied, victims listed. Planned to expose him after the wedding, clear my name. Eliza's hand flew to her lips. You, Newand, said nothing. Miss Marple nodded sympathetically. Fear silenced him, my dear. But Crowe learned of the letter, intercepted it via an accomplice in the post. The threads tightened. The garden glove planted by Crowe to suggest voluntary flight, mud from his own yard. The anonymous note his handiwork, to sow discord and divert suspicion. The cottage staging a false trail, chloroform and ropes to imply violence, but the tobacco scent a slip, matching not Sir Arthur's but Crowe's occasional pipe, glimpsed in village gossip. Footprints, his accomplices, a hired thug from London, traced via the scarred creditor's alibi crumbling under telegram inquiry, and the kidnapping, Miss Marple concluded, her voice unwavering, not for mere debt, but to silence a whistleblower. Extort confession or funds, then ... dispose, perhaps. Crowe, seeing the net close, slumped. All right, it was me. He owed plenty, but that letter would have ruined my operation. Dozens of loans rigged. Lured him out, held him in my hidden shed. To break him, but he escaped before I could finish. Craddock snapped handcuffs tighter. You'll answer for it in court kidnapping, fraught the lot. Sir Arthur embraced his son, forgiveness mingling with stern resolve. Foolish boy, but brave. In the end, Geoffrey clapped Reginald's shoulder, envy dissolved in relief. Eliza, after a moment's hesitation, took his hand. We start anew, no secrets. As Crow was led away, the household exhaled. Miss Marple gathered her knitting. Human greed weaves dark webs, but light pierces eventually. Raymond escorted her. Home, the village stars twinkling approval. In St. Mary Mead, peace returned. The revelation a bond to fractured trusts.